loss of function, an invasion with scar tissue. That's true atrophy. As I said at the time, I would love to use the term hypotrophy just for muscles that aren't being used but are still intact and can be brought back again to their normal size by exercise. But they don't use that word. They call it atrophy, and it really isn't. But as I said, true atrophy is invasion with scar tissue, and then parts of the muscle are missing because they don't function because the scar tissue doesn't have any of those qualities, those characteristics that we talked about the other day with muscles. Now, muscles are put together in bundles. A bundle is a fasciculus in Latin, or a fascicle in English. And about 20 to 80 bundles, of muscle cells make up the muscle. And of course, we said that the muscle cell is a fiber. It's long and it has many nuclei in it. Okay? And basically, we mix muscle with connective tissue when the muscle is made. Okay, so as you can see here, the fibers, the individual fibers, are covered with connective tissue, and we call that connective tissue endomysium. Okay, endo, we use three terms: endo and epi and peri. We'll get into peri and epi. We'll get into all that. So endo means within, of course, and this means that each muscle fiber is covered with this piece of connective tissue, which is longer than the muscle fiber. Okay, actually, all three connective tissue layers are longer than the muscle fibers for a reason. We'll get to that. The bundle that we form is covered by another piece of connective tissue called perimysium. Okay? So if you're looking here, and you can see on the picture what's happening. That's not supposed to happen. Control plus. It's supposed to get bigger. Look at that. It's not happening. No, it's just poo. That's not. I'm changing the word by to make it smaller. It's not doing it. Yeah, that's weird. Okay. It's supposed to get larger. That's the rules. Well, at any rate, you can't make it bigger. It's supposed to. I'm hitting Control Plus. It's supposed to grow, but it's not growing. So you have to look at it that size. Anyway, so each of those little circles, of pink circles, is a fiber. It's one muscle cell. Okay, and it's surrounded by the endomysium. The endomysium. There it is, right there. Endomysium surrounds each one, sort of white in between each of the fibers. That's your endomysium in there. Those little white lines. If it was bigger, it would be easier to see. Then to form the bundle, you get the perimysium, okay, which you can see there. And so all this white here around each of those endomysium-covered fibers is the perimysium, and that forms the bundle. And then when you put all the bundles together, and you make a muscle itself, you have the epimysium. And that should show us somewhere here. Should say epimysium. Can't see it. There it is. Epimysium. See that's on the outside. That covers the whole thing. So you have all these mesia, which is plural for mesium, and they're longer than the muscle fibers, so that they can come beyond the length of the muscle. And then, of course, there's no muscle within them, and they taper down, and they form the tendons. Okay, so the three mesia together, longer than the muscle fibers, form the tendons. So that's why they taper down. You can't really see that on here. And the tendons, of course, are used to connect the muscle to the bone on the periosteum. That's how that works. And of course, when the muscle moves, the bone moves. And that's if it's a strap-like tendon. So like your Achilles tendon is attaching your calf muscles, the gastrocnemius and the soleus, to your calcaneus. So the Achilles tendon is also called the calcaneal tendon because it does attach the calf muscle to the calcaneus, to the heel bone. All right? But what about flat muscles? Flat muscles also, like your abdominals, your rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis, internal external oblique muscles. There's no strappy tendon. They're flat tendons. Okay? It's a flat tendon, but still the same concept. We'll talk more about that. Anyway, so basically, a muscle, as it says, is a collection of bundles known as fascicles, and they're covered in this layer of connective tissue, the epimysium, as we said, and that makes up the entire muscle. Tendons have a tendon sheath over them. So remember, they're formed by all these mesia coming together and forming the tendon. They have a tendon sheath, and there's fluid under the tendon sheath, and it says to make virtually frictionless movement. And we try to get that now too. So, and if you think about it, if everything's functioning normally, and of course you have to have your joints moving well. Also, your muscles can be just fine. If you have bad arthritis in your elbow, this would be a difficult motion. You'd be doing this, and it would be kind of jerky and feel rough and grindy because you have these arthritic changes in the bone there. And that's not good. But if everything's like at your age, there shouldn't be arthritis yet, unless you had trauma. Anybody here have arthritis from a trauma? A few hands. Oh, these allergies are killing me. I think I'm going to have them all winter, which isn't any fun.
You need a Claritin?
What's that?
I have a chewable Claritin.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to just use one of these. But this will work. It's faster, and it dissolves right away. It's just to moisten it up. Also gives you good breath. I don't care about that part. I'm not close to anybody. At any rate, but thank you. Anyhow, so the tendons have this tendon sheath over them, and there's this fluid in there, and it moves. So if everything is cool and the joint is fine, like I have no trouble with my elbow. So as you move it, it feels very smooth. If you really concentrate, you don't think about it, you just move. But if you do it slowly and feel it moving, you say, hey, you know what, it really does move smoothly, virtually frictionless. There's nothing going on, there's no cracking, popping, the joint is in good shape, okay? And, the muscles are moving properly. It's very smooth. And you almost don't feel it. You kind of, it's moving, but it really doesn't, there's no grinding, there's no osteophytes, no bone spurs in the joint. So it's a good thing. And that's why, as it says, virtually frictionless movement, okay? Now, if you get excess fluid in the tendon sheath, the sheath covers the tendon, and the fluid's under it. If you get excess fluid, you get what's called a ganglionic cyst. Total misnomer. Okay, a ganglion is a cluster of nerve cell bodies. Okay, and there's no nerves involved here. It's fluid and a tendon and a sheath that covers it. But somebody called it that ages ago, so okay, we'll call it a ganglionic cyst. As I said, ganglion has to do with the nervous system and nothing to do with muscles. But that's what it is. And this is a ganglionic cyst on this guy's ankle. It's not just an enlarged lateral malleolus, coming off the fibula. It's a ganglionic cyst there, okay? And there's fluid in there. And it's not dangerous or anything like that, and it's not growing into anything. It's just a pocket of fluid on the tendon, between the tendon itself and its sheath, because there's fluid there anyway, but it's a buildup of fluid. So, it can be drained. It should be. In this case, it's not dangerous. It's never going to convert, oh my God, you got a ganglionic cyst, it's going to become a cancerous tumor. No, it's just a pocket of fluid. There's no tissue involved other than the enlargement of the tendon sheath itself. Okay? And that's fine. And it's not going to become dangerous, but it can be irritating. You can see where this one is. Imagine the guy trying to wear a shoe. It might get in the way of wearing a shoe because it sticks out and the side of the shoe is going to rub it and it's going to make it irritated and annoying and maybe hurt. So you got to do something about it. And what they usually do is they usually aspirate it. They just clean it up with alcohol on a cotton swab or on an alcohol pad, take a clean, sterile needle, stick it in, suck out the fluid. Unfortunately, they tend to come back sometimes. Now this is a pretty big one. You can get little ones, not uncommon, in the tendons that are running, because it's in the tendon. In the tendons of the hand. It's not unusual to find little tiny bumps in the back here along the tendons for the extensor muscles. All right, that are extending your fingers. Not so much here. Probably if you had one here, using your palm and smacking it down, you'd probably just break the little thing and that would be it. You'd never even know you had it. But on the back, unless you walk around smacking the wall with the back of your hand, they'll stay. And a little. They can be like, what a split pea looks like? A little tiny green pea. So that's like you had one under your skin. You leave it alone and you can smack it. It was an old treatment for these things, especially when on the back of the hand. It was called the Bible treatment. No, you don't sit and pray that it goes away, no. I don't know if you ever saw the old family Bible. That was this big book, gigantic. It wrote everything in it, right? All the births, the deaths, the marriages, everything like that. Okay? So they take the family Bible and put your hand down and smash it. and it would break the tendon sheath. It would break the little ganglionic cyst. Of course, it also probably broke your hand if they weren't careful.
My friend from work had that exact thing. I didn't know this is what it was, but every day that she'd come in and show me this thing on her hand.
Yeah.
And showing how
It was in the tendon for the
Yeah.
extensor muscles. Yeah.
And I told her, I was like, go to the rheumatologist, like, get it fixed, and she would. And she says, I just fix it myself. And she goes home, she sends me a video of her popping it with a glove, just like you said. She banged on it as hard as she can with a binder, and like, it's gone. Like, it's like never been.
It goes, that's it. The problem is you just have to be careful because if you hit too hard, you break the bones.
Yeah, no, someone else did it too. Like, she would like prepare and like, as hard as they could. Just one of her friends.
You gotta have a little restraint. You can't just.
No, yeah, she was crazy about it. She knew like what she had to do, and
Yeah.
it keeps coming back.
They can, yeah, that, I was about to say, they tend to come back sometimes.
Mhm.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, if you go to a doctor, they're not gonna, okay, put your hand down here, and they grab a big, like one of their medical books. No, they'll be a little more cautious about it. They'll take a little needle, a fine needle, and go in and try to aspirate the fluid out, and that shrinks it down also. And they can come back.
Yeah.
So
So
usually we
you think the
break
way
them
that
like
she
that.
like bangs down on it, it just doesn't the way that she does makes it come back. Like maybe she went to the doctor and got it drained and put in.
Not necessarily. Even with the drainage, it depends on the nature of that thing. I've never had one. I've known people who did, and when they went away, for the people I knew, they never came back. But, I mean, something like this is, in the back of your hand, it's annoying. Do they hurt? Not really, unless they're pressing on a nerve or something like that. It's just a pocket of fluid. It's not a growth. You know, you gotta realize it's like a water balloon. Okay, so this is like a water balloon, but in this guy's case, it's gonna be pressing on his ankle, probably pressing on nerves that are passing through there, you know, the peroneal nerve or something like that. If it does, it's gonna cause some pain, and certainly in an area like that, the shoe could rub up against it, then it just becomes irritating and annoying. But other than that, it's certainly not dangerous. It's never gonna convert to something cancerous or tumor-like. It's just a pocket of fluid.
Is it hard at the pressure spot?
Oh, no, they're pretty hard. Yeah, they're pretty hard. Yeah, and when you have one like on your hands here, which is typical, it feels almost like a split pea. It looks like the size of one, and if you press it, it feels hard like, but if you really press, it'll give a little, because it's just fluid in tissue, so it's gonna, you know, like a water balloon, you press it, it does give somewhere. And then, but yeah, so that's, so your friend did the Bible treatment.
Yeah, I want to see if she has a video of that. I want to see it.
I did it once on me, I think, but I didn't use a Bible. I think I used Gray's Anatomy. You know, because it's a big book. You know, it's nice big book. I have an old copy of it. So yeah, I think I did the same thing. I think it's right here. It's annoying, so it's like, you know, and that was that. And so if you're not careful, you could hurt somebody. So you gotta know what you're doing. But you know, yeah. So that's a ganglionic cyst. It's just it has nothing to do with ganglia, which are clusters of nerves. It's just a cyst in the tendon sheath with fluid. It happens. They're not uncommon. But if they're in a lousy spot, you got to do something. All right. Now, of course, as I said, the easy way is aspiration. You just rather. It would be hard on this. Okay, put your foot out here to the side, and I'm going to take this big Bible and smash it. You know? So chances are that person would go in and just have to clean it up with a little alcohol swab, clean the surface, stick a nice sterile needle in, and suck the fluid out. Could it come back? Sure, it's possible. But anyway, that's the way that works. Now, this is something here we're going to talk about, muscle contraction. And I'm probably going to have to do it twice because it's complex. I mean, in my head, I understand it real well, but that's because I've taught it about 250 times. So, and you know the old saying, throw enough mud against the wall, something sticks. So, after all that teacher's like, oh my God, this is so simple. But initially, when I first learned it somewhere along the way, it was like, wow, this is complicated. So, I usually end up doing it twice, talking about contraction. So, you know, it's fine. If you don't get it the first time around, we'll show you the second time. Anyway, muscle cells. All right, they're cells. They may not undergo mitosis, but they're cells, just like your cheek cell, or like a skin cell, or like a whatever cell, you know, a stomach cell, lining, whatever, you know. But they have a few different names because they're muscle cells. So first off, the cytoplasm is not known as cytoplasm, it's called sarcoplasm. Sarco is Greek for muscle. So it's the liquid, the plasm inside a muscle cell. Sarcoplasm. It's really muscle cell cytoplasm, but it's sarcoplasm. Okay. The endoplasmic reticulum is just called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. All right. You all know about the endoplasmic reticulum, now you know the sarco, it's in the muscle cell. cell membrane is called the sarcolemma. Right? It's still a cell membrane, it's still selectively permeable, but it's called the sarcolemma. All right? Sarcomeres are the contractile portion of the muscle. So what you're seeing here are sarcomeres. Right? That's what all these striations are. The sarcomeres that are going to cause that to contract. And how does this all work? Well, let's take a look. Okay? It's called a sliding filament process. We have 6 proteins that are involved in this, 5 of which are involved in the contraction, 1 is involved in the relaxation. All right? So we'll get the 5 out of the way and then we'll discuss relaxation. All right, there are 3 filaments, 3 protein filaments, and there they are. The thin one is called actin, the thick one is called myosin, and then there's an elastic one called titin. Titin, being elastic, is the only one that actually changes size when a muscle contracts. The thin and thick filaments, the actin and the myosin, don't change size. Okay, they're all part of this thing called the sarcomere, and they don't change size. They stay the same, they override each other. So like my fingers, representing them, if I bring my hands closer together, my arms closer together, notice I can bring my elbows closer, and I don't have to do anything, my fingers didn't have to do this. They override each other, and that's the key, is that they override. So the distance between my elbows is here, and now it's shorter. You know, even if I leave it out, it's shorter because we've been able to override these filaments and bring the elbows closer together, and that's contracting the muscle. Okay. So this is what we talk about. This is a sarcomere. Okay, the 3 filaments in the sarcomere here. And what we've got is several parts to it. Out here on the ends, you've got your Z disc on the end. The pink guys represent the myosin, the blue guys represent the actin. Okay? There's an H band in the center and an I band out here. And what happens is, you notice, it's the sliding filament theory, or the sliding filament process, not theory, process, where the filaments, the actin and the myosin, just override each other. And that's why the muscle gets shorter, because you're bringing them closer together, but you're not doing this with them and folding them up to bring them stuff closer together. They just have to overlap. So, see the way they're lined up? This is in relaxation up here, relaxed, and this is in contraction. Notice the size of the myosin and the actin, the blue guys, they didn't change. They're exactly the same size in the relaxed state as they are in the contracted state. They just really overrode each other so that they could bring the Z discs together closer, and that's contraction as opposed to relaxation. Okay, so how does this happen? It's this whole process, and we're going to go over this. Okay, now, protein. There's a protein complex, and it's a complex because the 2 proteins, troponin and tropomyosin, never come apart from each other. They're always together. It's like they're glued, and they will not separate. They act as a team, troponin, tropomyosin complex, always working together. Okay. It covers the myosin binding site. This guy here, the pink guy, has a binding site to mix up with, to attach to the blue guy, to the actin. All right? But it's blocked by the troponin tropomyosin complex. So it's sort of like this globular head on the myosin. The pink one has a globular head. The actin has a binding site. When you're going to do, well, let's do it this way. When you're going to do this, and the myosin head moves, it pulls the actin fiber and shortens the muscle up, like you see here from the top to the bottom. All right? However, the troponin and tropomyosin, here's the troponin, tropomyosin, here's the troponin. That's blocking this binding site. I can't get the actin to go in there. Okay? Can't get that in there. So, or the myosin. Can't get, no, well, it's on the myosin, but you can't get that to bind and pull. Okay? So you got to get this to come off. This troponin tropomyosin complex has to come off to allow the connection between actin and myosin. Okay? There's calcium. The endoplasmic reticulum of muscle cells is called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Sarco means muscle in Greek. So it's the same thing as the ER in your cells that you learned about, except here it's a sarcoplasm. Okay? Calcium is stored in there. Calcium is the key. Calcium, when it's released, is going to cause the troponin-tropomyosin complex to slide off and expose the binding site on the actin so the globular head on the myosin can grab it and pull. It's going to require ATP to do it. All right? So what you're seeing here, okay, when you reach the action potential, when you get enough electricity from the nervous system, okay, there's a motor end plate, which is right here, all right? The calcium is released from cisterns. There are cisterns, basically pots, if you will, that are holding on to calcium. As soon as we get the action potential to reach the right level, the calcium comes down. And as the calcium comes down, it attaches to the troponin-tropomyosin complex and allows that to slide off. Don't worry, I'm going to show you a video. To slide off. That exposes the myosin binding site on actin. So the actin, the blue ones that were up there, like this, and waiting for that globular head of myosin to get in there, and then that's going to pull. We're going to show you, don't worry. All right, so there's your muscle fiber. Here's the terminal axon. Okay, and right in here is the synaptic cleft. That's the synapse. All right, you need to secrete, in the case of muscle contraction, acetylcholine. All right, the neurotransmitter for muscle contraction. And basically, once that happens, the muscle can, what we saw up on top, when it was relaxed, and the sarcomere, when it was relaxed and when it overrode like that. Once we get that to move like that, that does this and shortens the entire sarcomere there. So that, okay, you shorten it from, as I said before, this to this without changing the size of the filaments. They really override each other, and that shortens it up, and that's contraction. All right, so you need the calcium for that. As I said, I'm going to show you now. Concentration of calcium in the sarcoplasm, which is the cytoplasm of a muscle cell, goes up 10,000 times. Once these cisterns, these pots that are holding all the calcium, open it up and release the calcium into the cell. Once that happens, calcium goes way up and allows for this whole movement for the troponin-tropomyosin to fall off, exposing the myosin binding site on actin. The myosin with its globular head comes along, and then the head moves like this and pulls. I'm going to show you a video. Okay, it pulls it, and pulling shortens the whole thing up like so, and that gives us contraction. Okay, as I said, the calcium binds directly to the troponin on the troponin-tropomyosin. The troponin's up on top, the tropomyosin's underneath, so it's like this. Calcium goes here. As I said, I'm going to show you a little thing. All right, once that happens, it slides off. So let's do this. All right, this used to, something changed over the years. This used to actually, see it says the animation there, but it doesn't animate anymore. However, the drawings are good enough. So we can show you that. And I still have an animation for you, so you get to see it. And I think this one has sound. Okay, so what are we looking at? All right, let's look at the legend. Unfortunately, like I say, you don't see any activity up there. This was a moving thing, but it didn't work anymore. Stopped for whatever reason. All right, so here's your legend. This is your myosin complex, and this says with ATPase activation. Notice the color change, turns orange. All right, brighter orange. That's your myosin. This is your actin, right there. This is the tropomyosin, and this is the troponin, and they act together. See, there's the tropomyosin in blue, and there's the troponin, which is that. But it's a complex. I mean, up in the legend, they're showing it separate, but they always act together. They're glued together. You never separate troponin from tropomyosin, so they have to act together. Now, what's the deal? The deal is, as you can see here, that this is the myosin head, this is the actin. This guy is looking to attach to this and pull it. It's sort of like a tug of war. In order to contract the muscle, remember we have to bring the sarcomere, shorten the sarcomere, those Z discs at the end have to come closer, and that's going to contract the muscle. All right? So what has to happen is, because the Z discs are out where my elbows are, and that myosin globular head has to hit the actin and pull. The head's going to bend. In fact, look at the positions. Notice that's open and then that's contracted. So as it bends like that, it pulls on the troponin. Okay? Not troponin, I'm sorry, on the actin. Pulls on the actin and shortens it up from both sides. So that whole sarcomere is shortened. That's how we contract. All right, so what do we need to do that? Well, we need something else. See that? Calcium. Little yellow guy, that's calcium. There it is right there. And we also need something else. We also need this, magnesium, little dunce cap. All right, magnesium's important because that's going to come in and it's going to get the ATP to become ADP and use that energy to make it happen. Remember, ATP is adenosine triphosphate. We need the phosphorus to release and take that high energy bond and use it for energy to contract this thing. Okay, so that's got to come along too. The magnesium stimulates that. It acts like a catalyst. So what's happening here, that's your whole, and there's a ATP, and once the phosphorus comes off, the energy that held it, remember what ATP is, adenosine molecule, a regular bond, first phosphate, high energy bond, second phosphate, high energy bond, third phosphate, ATP. All right, we're going to make it ADP by losing that last phosphorus, but in doing that, that energy that's holding it together is used for the contraction of the muscle. So we need ATP. All right, so using that legend, here you go. There's the troponin, and there's the tropomyosin. Okay, the purple. I guess, I don't know, royal blue, whatever. This is purple. Anyway, those acting together, they never separate. See, excuse me. They're always together. And they're blocking, at rest, they're blocking the myosin binding site on actin. This guy wants to attach here. So what do we need to do? We need to bring the calcium in. Once the calcium goes there, it slides off and opens up the binding site for the globular head of the myosin to hit the actin. Then, with the magnesium stimulation, the head moves and pulls on the filament. It's called the sliding filament process. These filaments slide, they override each other, and that's how we contract the muscle. It'll make more sense when I show you a little video of that in action rather than just talking about it. All right? So along comes the calcium. Okay? Calcium, there it is. Comes along, binds to the troponin of the troponin-tropomyosin complex. That makes it slide off and expose a binding site for this globular head of the myosin to hit it. So we got to bring that picture up. Notice it changes color, it turned orange. It's been activated. There's the magnesium sitting in there. There's what's now, this was the, excuse me. Oh, God. I'm dying. Anyway, okay, so once this releases, that's ATP. Once it releases, that goes, it becomes ADP, and it gets lost. It doesn't stay. So the ADP leaves. But we've got another ATP in there again to make this whole thing happen. So it just keeps replacing. Here comes another one. All right? And the head will get there and pull. And when it pulls on the actin, it shortens up the fibers. That's how they come together. The fiber itself, the filament, does not change size. It doesn't get shorter. But it's tug of war. You know, I mean, let's face it. You got two teams in a tug of war, and you got the rope. The rope doesn't get shorter, right? Well, one side pulls, and the other side moves with it, and that's basically what's happening. So nothing gets shorter. These things don't change size. These filaments, they just move around and override each other. The actin and myosin override each other to make the muscle contract, to shorten. As I said, when you see this in a video, it will work. All the explanations are here, what's going on. You can see that, and then we start the whole process over again. Once we stop contracting, then the troponin tropomyosin complex slides back over any binding sites. The myosin sits there, the actin is here, protected by the troponin tropomyosin complex, and that's it. There's no contraction anymore. The muscle relaxes, goes back to its original size and shape. Until the next time we need a stimulus, and we release the calcium, and we move the troponin tropomyosin off, and then the globular head of the myosin can go on the actin and do that. All right, so now let's take a look at the video. I'm gonna go back. This one, for some reason, isn't a link.
You use muscles every day to do activities. This woman is using muscles to breathe, circulate blood, and move her hand to take notes. Your cardiac and smooth muscle tissues are involuntary. who do not consciously control their actions. Skeletal muscle works under voluntary control. Skeletal muscles are composed of bundles of muscle fibers. Muscle fibers are long cylindrical cells containing several nuclei. Muscles will contract or relax when they receive signals from the nervous system. A neuromuscular junction is the site of the signal exchange. This is where the synaptic bulb of an axon terminal and muscle fiber connect. Muscle fibers are composed of many myofibrils. A myofibril contains contractile units called sarcomeres. Sarcomeres run adjacent to one another down the length of the myofibril. Each sarcomere consists of alternating thick and thin protein filaments, giving skeletal muscle its striated appearance. The muscle contracts when these
And of course, the thick filaments are myosin, the thin filaments are actin.
filaments slide past each other. The thick filaments are myosin, which are anchored at the center of the sarcomere, called the M line. The thin filaments are composed of the protein actin, which are anchored to the Z line on the outer edges of the sarcomere. Because the actin filaments are anchored to the Z line, the sarcomere shortens from both sides when actin filaments slide along the myosin filaments.
But notice that the filaments themselves never change their size. They're really overriding each other. So it's like two of you, and one on top of the other. You don't change your size, but you can get closer together this way because one rides over the other one, but you're still the same height, even though you're doing this.
Although the action between the filaments is described as sliding, the myosin filament actually pulls the actin along its length. The cross bridges of the myosin filaments attach to the actin filaments and exert force on them to move. This action is known as the sliding filament mechanism of muscle contraction. In this model, the sarcomeres shorten without the thick or thin filaments changing in length. A contraction begins when a bound ATP is hydrolyzed to ADP and inorganic phosphate. This causes the myosin head to extend and can attach to a binding site on actin, forming a cross bridge. An action called the power stroke is triggered, allowing myosin to pull the actin filament toward the M line, thereby shortening the sarcomere. ADP and inorganic phosphate are released during the power stroke. The myosin remains attached to actin until a new molecule of ATP binds, freeing the myosin to either go through another cycle of binding, add more contraction, or remain unattached to allow the muscle to relax. Muscle contractions are controlled by the actions of calcium. The thin actin filaments are associated with regulatory proteins called troponin and tropomyosin. When a muscle is relaxed, tropomyosin blocks the cross-bridge binding sites on actin. When calcium ion levels are high enough and ATP is present, calcium ions bind to the troponin, which displaces tropomyosin, exposing the myosin binding sites on actin. This allows myosin to attach to a binding site on actin, forming a cross bridge. Calcium ions are stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum and are released in response to signals from the nervous system to contract. Neurotransmitter molecules are released from a neuron and bind to receptors, which depolarizes the membrane of the muscle fiber. The electrical impulse travels down the T tubules and opens calcium stores. Calcium ions flow to the myofibrils, where they trigger a muscle contraction.
And this is where that calcium level goes up by 10,000 times in the sarcoplasm, the cytoplasm of the cell.
As the actin and myosin slide along each other, the entire sarcomere shortens as the Z lines draw closer to the M line. As the sarcomeres in myofibrils contract, the entire muscle fiber will shorten. When muscle fibers contract in unison, a muscle can produce enough force to move the body, allowing you to take notes.
Wasn't that cute? Anyway, did that make sense to everybody? Do you understand how that works? Like I said, you usually have to do this twice. That's what I put in notes. do we relax the muscle? Because otherwise it will keep contracting and stay that way. So what you gotta do to relax All right, so what do we have to do to relax it? As it says, the action potential has to stop. Okay, so let's face it, I'm holding this muscle up, it's contracting, it's staying contracted because I want it to. But if I don't want to do this anymore, my brain stops sending an electrical impulse to the muscle to say, contract, to show the class what you're talking about. All right, now it says, relax, we want to show the class something else. Okay, there you go. So now the whole sarcomere has lengthened again because the muscle's back to the relaxed state. Never 100%, flabby, because you do have muscle tone, right? If you're alive, and you can be alive but paralyzed. Let's say if you had polio or if you had a severing of a nerve, you have no muscle tone because it's getting a slight bit of electricity and slightly contracted just in the resting state. Okay, there's tone. As I said, if you had polio or something, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the spinal cord down the road. If you had something like that, you would have virtually no muscle tone because you've damaged the nerves that are going to the muscle to give it the tone. It's finished. That's why the muscles are paralyzed. See, people who had polio or a severe stroke with permanent damage, you notice it just lays there. You can just flop it around, and there's really no muscle tone to the area that's been damaged for whatever reason. So you don't have that. You have a certain amount of tone even in a relaxed state like this. There's tone, and then of course you get using it to contract the muscles when you voluntarily want to do something. Or if you're getting electrical stimulation from a therapy machine, okay, like a high volt stimulation, that's fine, nothing wrong with that. It can make your muscles contract completely without your voluntary activity. I have one of these machines in my office, and sometimes I'll play around with the patient, especially with the trap muscles. For a little, you get this. Well, you can do it with pads, or you get it through the ultrasound head. You can combine it, which is good because that's called trigger point. You can relax spasms. What happens is as you use this, it carries the electricity and the sound at the same time, or you can just do the sound alone. You run it over the muscle belly, let's say right here, of the trapezius muscle, and all of a sudden, as you get there with the electricity, you get this. Right? And they're not doing that. You're doing it with your little electrical wand there. If they had a spasm, you go there and it hurts because the muscle's contracting, and you just keep working it with the ultrasound at the same time, and it relaxes the spasm. And they say, hey, I'm just contracted, but I feel fine. Because you've gotten rid of the spasm with the ultrasound. But otherwise, you can play around without ultrasound just because you can ride it over. And I've done this with people just for fun. If I knew they had a sense of humor, okay, I wouldn't do it with somebody, some old bibby who's, what are you doing? We don't want that. At any rate. So the muscle belly is really where you're going to get the innervation that's going to make the muscle move. Okay? So as it says, in order to relax, time for a new battery. In order to relax the muscle, when the action potential stops, the calcium has to be removed from the troponin. Okay? Just remember this. The calcium was the troponin tropomyosin complex. Calcium was sitting on there. As long as it's there, that's going to be slid off, exposing the myosin binding site so that head can pull. And we don't want that. So we've got to get rid of the, excuse me, we have to move things and change them around. So we have calcium pumps, active transport. Okay, this requires ATP to get the muscle to relax. All right, another protein called calsequestrin. You know what it means to sequester something? It means to hide it. So calsequestrin grabs the calcium, says, you're not going to sit there anymore and cause this to happen. All right? Helps hold the calcium in the cisterns, which is where it came from in the first place, and the contraction is now finished. That's it. So we can stop the contraction. The troponin tropomyosin complex slides back over the binding site, on the myosin binding site on the actin, so that doesn't make any contact anymore, and everything relaxes. The titin is the third one I mentioned at the beginning. This is an elastic protein. The only thing, well, let's see if you can see it on this. Yes. Okay, you can see the titin, and I wish I could enlarge this thing, but I can't. Excuse me. No, oh, it doesn't move my stuff around. Yeah, it's not working like it should. Okay, let's go back. Anyway, look at the titin. The troponin and tropomyosin filaments, right? They don't change size. Right? We said, even though the Z discs are coming closer together, these guys just overriding each other. My fingers never get smaller. Okay, so they're tropin and tropomyosin, not tropin, actin and myosin, sorry. Actin and myosin overriding each other, okay? And so just because my elbows are coming closer together, my fingers are not getting any smaller, they're not shrinking. Okay, fine. Now, excuse me, God. What point was I making? I completely lost it because I used the wrong. Oh, Titan, yes. Thank you. The spring, you know, like in a retractable pen, I don't know if you ever took one apart, there's that little spring, all right? The spring allows the refill to either stick out or go in. Well, here's the spring right here. In a relaxed state, the spring is that long. In a contracted state, when your Z discs are closer together and you've overridden your actin and your myosin filaments, look what happens with the spring, it gets shorter. So it's the spring that's pulling in. That's the only thing that changes size. Everything else stays the same. You're just overriding the actin and the myosin. But the spring, the Titan right there, that's getting smaller. And that's what's pulling in on the Z discs and causing this to happen. As these override each other, and you saw the myosin globular head grabbing the actin and pulling, okay? As that happens, this gets pulled together and the spring, the Titan, gets shorter. So that's the only thing that changes size in a contraction is the Titan. Everything else stays the same. It's merely overriding. Okay? So that's, I once remember demonstrating this to a class years ago on a table like this. And I was like a filament and I slid it. It was really ridiculous. But it looked interesting. They thought it was cool. I'm not doing that again. Just suffice it to say, you saw it happen here on in an animation. Okay, so that's basically what's going on here. You've got these 5 proteins involved in contraction. Right? So actin, myosin, titin, troponin, tropomyosin. 5 proteins. So what about the 6th one? We did this, spoke about that. Now, in order to relax the muscle, all right, when the action potential, the electrical stimulation stops, we got to bring it back. We got to take that Titan, which is now compressed, the little pen spring, and we got to bring it back to its original shape. That will take the Z discs and bring them farther apart, which of course is now going to relax the fibers and make the muscle bigger again, longer, back to its original size and shape. So it's not contracted. All right. So in order to relax it, we accomplish it with calcium pumps. Okay. An active transport mechanism, and another protein, calsequestrin. You know what it means to be sequestered? To be sequestered means to be hidden away. So it's going to hide away the calcium. Put it back in the cisterns until the next contraction, when it comes back out of the cisterns and comes through the sarcoplasm, which is the cytoplasm, and we have that 10,000 times higher concentration of calcium to allow for this whole thing to happen. When the calcium binds, you saw all that before. Okay? So that's the end of the contraction. And that's, now, do we understand this? Does this make sense? Question?
Yes, but my question
But I'm not
is,
sure.
If you have a cramp, does that mean that the
A cramp?
calcium is gone? It's not there?
Well, that's a good point. Obviously, a cramp is a spasm in the muscle, and it's in a constant state of contraction. There are several reasons possible for that. It could be an electrical stimulus that goes in. We're going to talk about tetanus here, which is a pathological cramp. Let's face it, we all get cramps. Oh my God, I woke up in the middle of the night, I had to hop out of bed and straighten out, because my muscle, my calf muscle particularly, that's so common, calf muscle went into spasm and you feel like you want to die, and so it hurts like hell, and the muscle's like a rock, okay? There's various reasons for that. That could be a calcium deficiency can cause that, interestingly. It could be neurological. Usually it's not anything that serious, obviously.
Does potassium help?
Potassium's supposed to help,
But calcium.
but
is
calcium
there.
is really, yeah. People who have calcium deficiencies, interestingly though, they'll get spasms. You know, when you say, well, wait a minute, don't you need the calcium for the contraction process? You know, like what's going on here?
They don't know what to do.
But yeah, it's basically, you need, calcium deficiency will cause spasms too, which is kind of weird because it shouldn't. Because you just increased it by 10,000 times to make the contraction take place. So if a deficiency is there, why the heck is it contracting? You say, I can't, I'm too weak. But it doesn't work that way, it's really weird. I think it's compensation on the body's part. But at any rate, yeah, so, it's, you have to balance it. And of course, the way to fix this, people can get typical calf spasms are the ones you wake up in the middle of the night. If you get that, the trick with muscles is that you have to hyperextend it. So if you have a calf muscle spasm, which is one of the most common ones, the way to get it to stop is to point your toes towards your head. Stretch the muscle. You've got Golgi tendon organs and Golgi stretch reflex response. And if you hyperstretch it, it says, oh, I have to relax because you're stretching. The body has built-in protective mechanisms so that you don't overstretch a muscle. I mean, you can do it. Was it we were talking about changing the oil, right? When I talk about that, or oh God, my brain is shot today. I think it was 3 hours of sleep is not enough. And I get this most every night. The movie, oh well, the one, part 1 and 2, he did too.
Wait, Joker? Are you talking about Joker?
No.
Smiles?
No. I'm talking about Stiller, Ben Stiller. Night at the Museum, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and Genghis Khan takes everybody and stretches. If you do that, you can do too much damage, but there is a stretch reflex, and what happens is as you overstretch the muscle, it contracts so it doesn't get overstretched. Thank you. It's like I said, 3 hours of sleep is just not enough, and I get too many nights like that. How I'm even standing here is rather amazing. If I fall asleep and collapse, just leave me. But at any rate, yeah. So if you stretch like that, you shouldn't hyperstretch a muscle, and the reaction to that is to relax it and let it shorten. Okay, but they're overdoing it by stretching in 4 directions. Kiki kaka, just a little bit. Yeah. Or was it Miki kaka? I don't speak that language. But it's a funny movie. It's good. Anyhow, so yeah, it's stretching should cause the muscle to relax a little, so you don't hyperstretch it. All right, that's a stretch reflex. So basically, the whole concept here is that you don't damage the fibers by going too far. But that's you yourself. That's not 4 guys from Genghis Khan's army pulling in 4 directions. That doesn't count. Okay. Anyway, so tetanus. We're not. Yes, the disease tetanus. Of course, we know that step on a rusty nail and you get tetanus, right? Because there are bacteria that cause it. But we can get tetany of a muscle. All right. Tetanus, as it says, is a sustained contraction. Okay, sustained contraction doesn't have to be pathological in the sense that you stepped on the rusty nail and got Clostridium tetani into your system, and they're producing tetanus toxin, all right, and causing spasms. No, this is just you get a spasm in a muscle. It's not a disease state. It's just your muscle. You wake up in the middle of the night with this cramp. All right. So a staircase effect is called TREC. It leads to tetanus. And what happens basically is it contracts, then it gets a little worse, then it gets a little worse, and finally gets to the point where tetanus, where the muscle is stuck. All right, it has nothing to do with the toxin, nothing to do with the bacteria, Clostridium tetani, that cause it. You can get this, that's a muscle spasm. And as I said, when you get up in the middle of the night with a calf cramp, for example, the thing to do is to stretch out, I know it's hard and it hurts, but to stretch out your leg and point your toes back towards your, voluntarily if you can, because you're using your tibialis anterior muscle to pull your toes back. So you're not dealing with the calf muscles, but the tibialis anterior and the gastrocnemius and soleus, which is right under that, they're antagonistic muscles. All right? Tibialis anterior, and it's very hard with your hand because you don't have that. Tibialis anterior brings your toes up, and the gastrocnemius and soleus point your toes down. So they're antagonists to each other. So these guys, the gastrocnemius and soleus, on the calf muscle there, are in spasm, and you're feeling the horrible spasm. If you pull up with your tibialis anterior, you stretch them. That stretch reflex tells the muscle to automatically relax. All right? This is again saying we're not dealing with tetanus toxin from the disease. We'll get to that. All right? But that should work. So ideally, if you utilize the antagonistic muscles to get the action to take place, the one that's in spasm should relax. It's just a natural stretch reflex, and the body says, oh, if you're going to stretch that much, we better relax you, because let's face it, you're in contraction, that's why you're getting this calf cramp, because the muscle's pulling, and ideally, if you just let it go, even though you're in pain, the foot would point downward like that, because the calf muscles are pulling on it. Alright? So using the tibialis anticus or tibialis anterior muscle to pull back this way, or even your hand. Lean your leg out, if you can reach forward, grab your toes and pull them back towards you. That will cause a stress reflex in the gastrocnemius, and it will relax naturally. And you should be able to overcome it. Again, assuming it's not being caused by tetanospasmin, which is the chemical produced by Clostridium tetani, and that's a whole different ballgame. You know, if you stepped on that famous rusty nail, okay, and it doesn't really always, but that's the reason. Anybody know why if you stepped on a rusty nail you could get tetanus and the disease? Anybody know? Well, why the famous rusty nail? Well, number one, rusty nails aren't smooth. The rust has all pits in it. You know, if you look at it with a magnifying glass, see little pits. Pits are a great place for the spores of Clostridium tetani to hide. But where are you going to find that? In the soil. There are Clostridium spores in the soil all the time. They're always there. Right? So when you cut yourself, oh, you know, you better watch it. You could have pushed spores in. The bacteria, Clostridium tetani, are what we call obligate anaerobes. And anaerobe means it has to live without oxygen. They are obligate anaerobes. Oxygen is toxic to them, but they are able to make spores. So the spores don't give a damn. Spores can live for thousands of years. They did some research on mummies, and they swept the surface and stuff, and they found spores that they were able to date and figure out these Clostridium spores were 3,000 years old. But they were just sitting there waiting for the right moment to come back to life. Right? And if they got injected into your bloodstream, which is an anaerobic environment, even though you breathe, and your red blood cells are carrying oxygen on the hemoglobin. It's not free oxygen. Therefore, they don't care. They come back to life and say, hey, this is great, let's come back to life. And they produce this tetanospasmin, the chemical that causes the spasm. I'm going to show you a picture. And that's where the problem lies. So that's why the old rusty nail, because rusty nails aren't smooth and have a place for the spores to hang out. Where do you usually find a rusty nail? Like you can walk through here and find one on the floor? No, you find them in the dirt. All right? Somebody threw out a piece of wood and it had a nail on it. I'll tell you a story. Had a nail on it sticking out. It's laying in the dirt, picks up the spores. And remember, rust is not smooth. It's all pitted. Those spores sit in those rusty pits, and you step on it, you're injecting those spores right into your system. And the spores then are in the bloodstream saying, no oxygen, no free oxygen, no oxygen. Great, let's come back to life and be real bacteria that produce the tetanospasmin, the chemical that causes tetanus. And that's it. So they're producing this chemical, this toxin, and making you sick. All right? Now there are antitoxins for it, and that's the thing you get if you stepped on something like that and you ran right to the doctor or the hospital. They'll give you a shot of this anti-tetanospasmin stuff, an antitoxin, and that's that. And you should be okay. It'll neutralize any toxin form. In the meantime, your body will fight the bacteria. That'll be the end of it. And eventually you get a booster, which is a weakened form of this toxin that your body can deal with and produce antibodies to. And then if you stepped on that rusty nail within 10 years, you wouldn't have to worry about it. Or if you got bitten by a dog. We all have tetanus spores in our mouths. Dogs have it too. So, you know, if you get bitten by a dog and they fix it up and say, you know what, let me give you a tetanus shot. Well, it's an antitoxin shot. In case some of those bacteria that were in the dog's mouth got into your system, came back to life and started producing tetanospasmin. And so, you know, there's a whole science behind it. So basically, we're going to talk about disease coming up, but let's talk about the different kinds of contractions. Okay? We'll get to all the other stuff in a bit. So, different contractions. Isometric contraction. All right. Metric means measurement, size of the muscle. Iso means the same. So what happens is in the isometric contraction, the tone, the tension of the muscle will change. It'll go from more flaccid to more tight, okay, more contracted. But the size of the muscle doesn't change. Isometric, same meter, same measurement, same size. So basically the muscle gets harder, but it doesn't get shorter. Okay, because it's definitely going to get harder, it has to. All right? Length of the muscle remains the same, but the tone gets tighter. That's an isometric contraction. So why do I have this picture of this busty broad and all these other busty broads? This is a real ad from magazines from way back. I remember this from my childhood, okay, like the 50s and the 60s. they sold this product called the Mark Eden Bus Developer. Okay, Mark Eden Bus Developer, as it says, it's the world's most successful bus line developer. Okay, and really, there it is, this little thing with the spring, and you see her looking and looking. Oh, they're always so happy when they use it. See, she's smiling, and it's got a hinge over here. Her hinge, the hinge is up on the top, and her hands fit into this little groovy area here. The palms fit in there. Bless you. And the spring allows you to just compress it and relax it. Now you wouldn't be doing it this way, because that's only using your arms. The concept is you hold it like this, and you do it this way. And as you, in fact, if you just right now, without the Mark Eden Bus Developer, which I don't think is out there anymore, but if you right now just took your arms and stuck them out, don't hit your neighbor in the face with your elbow, and you put your palms together like this and press and relax and press and relax, you're going to feel your pectoralis muscles getting tighter and relaxing. Tighter when you press, relaxing. Tighter, you can feel the pecs tightening up. I feel it all the way into here. Okay, so what was the Mark Eden Bus Developer doing? They didn't show these busty ladies. Look at the size of that. Come on, this woman's got to be a C cup, maybe a D. She started out that way. It's not going to change the cup. If she was a 32A, little tiny cup, and she did this whole thing, boom, boom, hey, she could become a 34, 36. She's still going to be an A. It's not going to increase the size of the breast. The breast is tissue. It's got fat. It's got mammary glands in there. It's got some connective tissue. That's it. She's not adding to tissue. What she's doing is she's building up the pectoralis muscles behind the bust, behind the breast, and pushing them out forward. So they stick out more, but the cup size doesn't change. So if she was a 32A, she's going to be a 34 or 36A. So if she's looking to get the bust, you want to get the bust bigger? Get pregnant. Fill up with milk, those things get really big. Oh, isn't that great? I've heard more women who were pregnant say, you know, I had these small breasts when I started, I got pregnant, look at the size of that bust line. Then I gave birth and the kids finished and they went back. I wish I could have kept that. Well, you want to keep that, just keep being pregnant. And making milk constantly, and those mammary glands are going to keep full and you'll be out there with milk all the time. Yeah. Forget it. And then the rich families used to have that, a wet nurse and a dry nurse. The wet nurse was a lady who gave birth to her own baby. And she usually would bring along. And she nursed. The rich woman didn't want to, I don't want to be bothered. My kid wakes up in the night. So let the wet nurse do it. And she would nurse these kids all day with her baby. And that's fine. As long as she's nursing, she keeps it going. And those breasts are going to be full of milk all the time. So they're going to be bigger than they were when she wasn't nursing.
Wait, as long as, even though she...
Without her baby, as long as you keep nursing, and the lactation continues, and the glands are filled with milk. So the breasts are bigger. All right? Once you stop, and the glands stop producing milk, they shrink back to what they were prior to having the milk. You know, the milk is only there when you need it. Now, of course, if you're a wet nurse, I had one kid. I'm never having any more kids, but I keep working for all these families, and I'm constantly nursing babies. Bobby doesn't know. Doesn't care whether it's your kid or somebody else's kid. It's just, make milk, make milk, make milk, and the mammary glands swell up with milk. So the breasts are bigger. You know, that's basically what this was all about. So, you know, you hire wet nurse and dry nurse, which is the nurse that takes care of the kid and change the diapers and, you know, do whatever around the house. But yeah, so that was the difference. But at any rate, so this whole development thing is simply building up your pectoralis major muscles. Right? Back there, yeah, and you know where the pec major is now. You've had muscles in the lab, so you know what they are. And that's basically what this is all about. So it really didn't do anything for the breast tissue per se. It merely built up the muscles and pushed them out further. Okay. So that was that. Now, anyway, that was, as I said, that was isometric contractions. Now, as I said, you don't need to use this device. All you need to do is put your palms together and do this. And you can do, so guys who want to look really buff, you know, like you lift weights, yeah, you're sitting at a red light, do this. You'll feel the pecs contracting and relaxing. Watching TV, yeah, a good football game on a Sunday, yeah, sit and do this. Every once in a while you reach in and get the popcorn, you know, and you do this, and all of a sudden people say, wow, look at this guy, he must lift weights. I said, no, I just do this all day. You know, while you're listening to me, if you're not actually taking notes, if you have, you have a computer and all, whatever, you can sit here for the whole hour and 15 minutes and do this. Imagine how much exercise you get out of it, right? By the end of the semester, you're going to look like the Hulk. Look at my muscles. Meanwhile, it does nothing for your cardiovascular system. So you're gonna look great, and you're gonna have this terrible cardiovascular system. Why is this guy always sick? Well, look at him, he looks great. Well, it's because he sits here and does this all day. You know? And women, ladies, you can push your breasts out. They're not gonna get any bigger. The cup size stays the same, but so build up those pectoralis major muscles. Okay, anyway, that's isometric, meaning the same measurement. The muscles are not changing their size in their contraction. That's what the isometric means. It changes the tone. And as you can see, I mean, if you do this, your pectoralis muscles are not getting any shorter. If you measure from here to here, or from here to here on the pec muscle, you'd see every time you did this, it would get harder, but it wouldn't get shorter. And that's isometric, same measurement. Okay, so what about isotonic? Meaning the same tone. Okay, so the tone remains the same, but the size is different. And throughout the contraction, the tone stays at the same exact hardness, if you will, of the muscle. But the measurement of the muscle changes. And you got two kinds, concentric and eccentric. Well, you know, eccentric, we already know just from the word eccentric, kind of means unusual, out of the ordinary, right? Oh, that guy is really eccentric. Usually rich people. They're allowed to be eccentric because they have money. If you stay on the good side, you might benefit, you know. So, but they're rather eccentric. You wouldn't say they're crazy. They probably are crazy, but because they have a lot of money, they're not crazy, they're just eccentric. All right? At any rate, and you're hoping to gain from that. So isotonic, same tone, but measurement changes. Okay, so as it says, the tone remains the same, but the length changes. So you have two kinds, concentric and eccentric. Well, concentric is what you'd expect. The muscle shortens during the contraction. So doing this, just lifting my arm up, I'm doing an isotonic contraction. Easier if you have a weight. All right? So I'm lifting this thing up, but I don't want to drop it. So as I lift this way, the biceps brachii is shortening. But if you put your finger on the biceps from the beginning all the way to the point where I get it up here, you'll feel that the tone, isotonic, same tone, the tone remains the same throughout the whole contraction. Never changes. Doesn't get softer, doesn't get harder. It remains the same during the action. As I'm lifting, as I'm flexing my elbow, the biceps brachii stays the same tone throughout. That's an isotonic contraction. And it's concentric because what's happening? It's what you'd expect. A muscle contracts, it gets shorter. Right? That's the normal way. Eccentric, well, you know what eccentric means, right? As we said, it means kind of strange. You know, out of the ordinary. And as I said, if they're really rich, you never point out the fact that they're eccentric, because you may hope to get some of their money someday. Okay, so eccentric, during the contraction, the muscle gets longer. That's backwards from what, let's face it, if I never talked about this and just said, well, what happens to the size of a muscle when it contracts? I say, it gets shorter. Yeah, sure, it just got shorter. You know, the biceps was this big, and now when I get to the top, it's only this big. Went from that to that, it got shorter. That's normal, that's the concentric contraction. But the eccentric contraction is that it gets longer during the contraction. Well, how does that happen? Okay, we'll take the opposite action that we did with the biceps. As we do this, the biceps is staying isotonic, the same tone throughout the contraction, gets up to here, and it's shorter. Now, I don't want to just drop this thing. I want to slowly lower it back down to the table. So as I do that, I have to do it slowly. Well, there's still a tone in here. It stays the same because I'm holding up the same weight throughout the entire extension of my arm. But this muscle's contracted, because otherwise I'd do that. It would just fall down. I'm doing it slowly. It's a controlled release here, a controlled descent. The muscle, if you feel it, stays the same. As it gets longer, it's still contracting. Otherwise, the arm would just collapse and this would hit the table. So that's why it's an eccentric. Remember what eccentric means, out of the ordinary, unusual. Well, the muscle, when you think of a muscle contraction, you say, well, if it contracts, it has to shorten to do work. Yeah, in this case, it's lengthening to do work. It's getting longer instead of shorter, but it's still contracted. It still has the same tone throughout that whole slow placement of my bag on the table. That's why it's an eccentric contraction, because even though it's contracted, it's lengthening. And that's the difference with that and the concentric. All right, so this is what's happening at the neuromuscular junction, all right, the nerve-muscle junction, as to why the muscle's contracting. All right, we didn't do the nervous system yet. When we do, we'll talk about synapses and nerves synapsing with other nerves and all kinds of stuff, and stimulatory synapses and inhibitory synapses, all that. Bless you. But for this, we'll just take a look. This is the axon. This is the axon terminal. Inside the axon terminal, and we haven't done nerves yet. Well, we did nerves a little bit. We talked about tissue at the beginning, nervous tissue. We did talk about it somewhat. in the axon terminal here, you've got these little vesicles with the red dots in them. The red dots represent a neurotransmitter. In the case of muscles, it's acetylcholine. All right? That's the only one we look at with muscles, acetylcholine. So what's going to happen is as the action potential, the nerve impulse comes down, these little vesicles that contain the red dots, the acetylcholine, are going to work their way to the surface and merge with the surface and dump out their contents. Exocytosis. Exocytosis. I think we talked about that. Oh. It's time. All right, we'll get back to this, because I really need more than a minute to finish talking about it. So we'll pick up here and talk about muscle diseases and whatnot. That would be the last lecture for this before the exam. So what you might want to do is, if you have questions on anything that we're going to do in the exam, you should have some extra time next week. So Tuesday, if you have something that you want to ask about, bring it with you as a question. We'll finish this up and then we'll entertain questions for you guys.
Wait, a magnetic type of bond is a hydrogen bond?
You know, I mean, look, if we covered it, it'd be 6 semester course. Seriously, I mean, you couldn't possibly do it in 2 semesters.
You have class right now?
Obviously, I've got a couple of things that's important.
Yeah.
Understand, so
No, I have someone, I have green at 3 o'clock.